By the time Microsoft Word became the most widely used software application in the history of personal computing, the man who built its foundation was already gone. Not fired, not pushed out, just done the way people who have spent 21 years watching the world credit someone else for their vision eventually decide, quietly, that they have given enough. His name was Charles Simonyi, and his story raises questions that the famous version of Silicon Valley history never answers. Why would the man who built Word and Excel, the two most profitable software products ever made, simply walk away from all of it? Why did Bill Gates, in 1981, bet his young company on a refugee from communist Hungary that almost nobody in America had heard of? What did Xerox have sitting inside one building in Palo Alto that was reportedly worth more than the entire company, and why did they throw it away? And years later, when Apple dragged Microsoft into the biggest copyright fight in tech history, why did Microsoft's own lawyers stand up in court and point the finger at Xerox? Every one of those questions has an answer, and the last one will change how you see the most famous rivalry in technology. If you love stories about corporate deception, brilliance, and the secrets behind the biggest empires in the world, click subscribe right now. We bring these stories every week, and you will not want to miss what is coming next. To understand Charles Simonyi, you first have to understand the strangest building in American business history. In 1970, Xerox was the undisputed king of the office. Their photocopier had not just dominated a market, it had become a verb. And flush with more money than they knew how to spend, Xerox's leadership gave chief scientist Jack Goldman something that almost never happens inside a large corporation, a blank check to build the future, with no commercial expectations attached. The result was the Palo Alto Research Center, PARC. Inside one low building off Page Mill Road in California, Xerox assembled what many historians consider the most concentrated collection of computer science talent ever gathered under one roof. The graphical user interface, the computer mouse refined into something usable, Ethernet networking, laser printing, object-oriented programming, the modern personal computer itself. Nearly every foundational technology of the digital age was developed or dramatically advanced inside that building. And Xerox management, by nearly every account that survives, did not understand what any of it was worth. In 1972, a young man arrived at PARC who would become one of its most consequential minds. He had been born in Budapest, Hungary, in 1948, the son of an electrical engineering professor. As a teenager, he had worked night shifts as a watchman at one of the only computer laboratories in the country, and fallen in love with the machines he was guarding. He got out of Hungary, made his way through Denmark to California, enrolled at Berkeley, and wrote a program so impressive as a student that it earned him a job before he had even graduated. His name was Charles Simonyi. He was 23 years old, and he was about to spend nearly a decade building the future for a company that would never use it. Working on the Alto PARC's revolutionary personal computer, Simonyi and colleague Butler Lampson developed a program called Bravo. It was the world's first WYSIWYG text editor. What you see is what you get. The idea was simple and radical. What appeared on the screen would match exactly what came out of the printer. No codes, no memorized commands, no gap between what you created and what you saw. Bravo was operational by 1974, a full decade before ordinary people would touch anything like it. Everyone who saw it understood they were looking at the future. Everyone, that is, except the company that owned it. Here is where this story stops being about a brilliant engineer and becomes something else entirely. The Alto was never truly commercialized. Xerox produced roughly 2,000 units, almost entirely for internal use. The machine containing the blueprint for personal computing was kept behind closed doors, partly because Xerox's sales machine was built to sell expensive copiers to big corporations, and partly because, according to numerous accounts, management simply did not believe the personal computer market would ever matter. You probably think this is a story about Xerox's failure. It is not, because while Xerox was busy not noticing what it had, something far more consequential was happening inside that building. The people were leaving. One by one, the minds who had built the future were walking out the doors of PARC and into the rest of Silicon Valley, and the future was leaving with them, carried out in their heads where no security badge could stop it. Robert Metcalfe left and founded 3Com. John Warnock and Charles Geschke left and founded Adobe. The building stayed, The blueprints walked. That is the real story. Not a company that lost the technology, a company that lost the people and never even noticed they were gone. But something happened in December of 1979 that made one of those departures matter more than all the others. Steve Jobs led a delegation of Apple engineers into Xerox PARC for a demonstration. The visit was part of a deal. Xerox's venture arm had invested $1 million in Apple in exchange for a look inside the lab. Jobs saw the Alto's graphical interface and, by every account of those present, was electrified. He reportedly told his team afterward that Xerox had no idea what it was sitting on, and that Apple was going to build it properly. The Macintosh was born from that visit, and the story of Jobs raiding Xerox became Silicon Valley legend. But almost nobody talks about what happened next. If you are enjoying this story, take 1 second to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep bringing you stories like this. Thank you. Now back to the man everyone forgot. In 1981, 2 years after the famous Jobs visit, Charles Simonyi left Xerox PARC. The introduction came through Robert Metcalfe, his old PARC colleague, who reportedly told him about a small, hungry software company up in Washington state. Simonyi applied directly to its young founder. Bill Gates hired him almost immediately. Think about what Gates acquired in that single hiring decision. Not a consultant, not an engineer who had studied PARC's work. The man who had spent 9 years building it, the co-creator of Bravo, the architect who carried the entire design philosophy of the graphical interface in his head. Simonyi became Microsoft's 40th employee and its director of application development. He would eventually rise to chief architect, and he arrived with an agenda. According to his own later accounts, Simonyi insisted from his first days that Microsoft needed to move toward graphical interface technology, not eventually, but immediately. He had built it once. He had watched Jobs walk through PARC and understood instantly what Apple was about to do. Gates, who had reportedly been thinking along the same lines, now had something Apple did not have. Apple had seen the future for an afternoon. Microsoft had hired the men who built it. That is the detail history keeps missing. When Steve Jobs later accused Bill Gates of stealing the Macintosh's visual language, Gates famously replied that they both had a rich neighbor named Xerox, and that Jobs had broken in to steal the television only to find someone had already taken it. The line gets quoted everywhere. What never gets quoted is the quieter truth underneath it. Microsoft had not just borrowed ideas from Xerox. Microsoft had the architect. There is a significant difference between copying a blueprint and employing the man who drew it. Simonyi went to work. He recruited Richard Brody, a young programmer who had worked under him at Xerox on Bravo's successor, and together they built something the personal computer industry had never seen. The dominant word processor of the era, WordStar, ran on text commands users had to memorize. Simonyi and Brody built a graphical word processor drawing directly on the principles behind Bravo. It was released in October of 1983 under a simple name, Microsoft Word. Excel followed, with Simonyi overseeing its development. Together, Word and Excel became the most profitable software applications in the history of personal computing, the foundation of an office empire that would eventually reach more than 1 billion desks worldwide. A program born in a Xerox research lab in 1974, reborn at Microsoft in 1983, conquered the world, and Xerox earned nothing from it. Then came the lawsuits, and this is where the final question gets its answer. In 1988, Apple sued Microsoft, claiming Windows had copied the visual language of the Macintosh. It became the most significant copyright case in technology history. The case ultimately turned on a licensing agreement the two companies had signed in 1985, but along the way, Microsoft lawyers deployed a devastating argument. The graphical interface, they argued, was not Apple's to claim. The core ideas, the desktop metaphor, the windows, the visual interaction, had come from Xerox PARC. Even the court's final ruling acknowledged that the desktop metaphor conceitedly came from Xerox. Microsoft pointed at Xerox in open court. And the man who had helped build those very concepts at Xerox, the living link between the original and the empire, was sitting inside Microsoft the entire time, never called to testify. He did not need to be. His work testified for itself, on every screen, in every office, around the world. There was one final irony. The courtroom argument reportedly accomplished something Microsoft never intended. It woke Xerox up. In December of 1989, Xerox filed its own lawsuit against Apple, trying at last to claim ownership of what its researchers had built. The case was dismissed within months. Xerox had arrived a decade too late. The company that built everything ended up, legally, with nothing. Charles Simonyi left Microsoft in 2002, after 21 years. The answer to the first question, why walk away, turned out to be the simplest one. He had ideas Microsoft could not contain. He founded Intentional Software to pursue a programming concept he had been developing for decades. He traveled to the International Space Station twice, in 2007 and 2009, as one of the first private citizens to do so. A fitting destination for a man who had spent his whole life going places nobody believed possible. According to Forbes estimates published in 2025, his net worth stands at roughly $7.5 billion. He earned almost none of it at Xerox. And Xerox? Their $1 million investment in Apple, the deal that opened PARC's doors to Steve Jobs in the first place, grew to $17.6 million by the time Apple went public. That was their total return on inventing the future. Less than the cost of a single Super Bowl commercial today, in exchange for the technology that built trillion-dollar empires. Here is the final shape of this story. A company built the future and could not see it. A refugee from communist Hungary spent 9 years inside that company building it piece by piece. And when the company let its people walk out the door, one of them carried the future across Silicon Valley in his head and built it all over again for someone who was actually paying attention. Xerox owned the building, but the future was never really in the building. If you found this story as mind-blowing as we did, subscribe to the channel and join our email notification list so you never miss an episode. The link is in the description below. On your screen right now is our next corporate crime and betrayal story. Click over and I will see you there.